Now taking the stage, Greg Porter.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to IDEAcademy and Eastman and ETSU for frankly just putting on such a cool annual event. I truly feel privileged to have been invited to participate this year. As long as I can remember, as young as I can, being a young kid, I wanted to start a business. It's really all I wanted to do. The problem was that there was no one in my family, no one that I even knew that had done it or could even help me do that. So I love the way that Allison started us off today with storytelling, because I'm going to tell you my story today that takes this regular kid from that situation to years later having a company and an enterprise big enough that it would attract the attention of Apple. And I'm going to give you a few lessons learned and experiences along that journey, including when the fate of my career and my entire company and the jobs of hundreds of my employees hinged on a single conversation that I would have with Steve Jobs while he and I were sitting across the table from each other. But I'm going to start by telling you a couple of things that you don't need if you've dreamed of starting your own business, but something has held you back. You don't need an Ivy League MBA. Apologies to all the Ivy League MBAs in the room. You don't need an MBA at all. You don't need to come from a rich family. Mine wasn't. My family was middle class at best. You don't need to have any business experience in your family. But what I did find I needed, it was key to me, was solving a problem. And for me, that opportunity came in high school. I had a computer class, and neither the teachers nor the students really knew what to do with this because someone had just shipped a truckload of computers to my school. They said, go at it and turn in a project in a couple of weeks. But what my friend and I knew that no one else did is that our high school was in an attendance crisis. Literally no attendance was being recorded anywhere in the high school. Most students didn't know this yet, and the administration was certainly trying to keep it under wraps. But my friend and I did, and we decided to make it our class project to fix that problem. And we were actually able to do it with no programming training or anything like that, just kind of learning on our own and reading some manuals. We kind of hacked together something pretty quickly that was simple and worked for our school. And in fact, it worked so well that the other schools in the district approached us and wanted to purchase it. And in a sign of our business acumen at the time, we just said, yes, that sounds great. No negotiation, no contract, no counter proposal, nothing, because they offered $2,000 when we were high school juniors. And to us, we took that check, we split it, and we both felt like we had inherited a heap of Bitcoin from a rich aunt. And I realized that metaphor would have had more power prior to the Bitcoin crash, but you get the point. And that was the moment that for me, it connected that by solving a problem, I could start a business. I could make money. I could make a profit. And so I took that and rolled with it. And I had this kind of start with the computers, and I never did get any formal computer training of any kind. But fast forward now a few years, and I have hacked together a system that would basically manage all of the records for a single school. Attendance, grades, transcripts, teacher records, a few other things. And I have a handful of schools using it at this point, only a handful. But I have come to realize that I'm not really going to make any headway in this business unless I can sell directly to school districts. That's where all the big purchasing decisions were made. And obviously I was a small fry in this business, and I just needed to make that move if there was any chance of anything happening. So I signed up for my first school district sales presentation. Now, keep in mind that I was going up against seasoned professionals. I was presenting against sales reps who had been doing this for years, whose companies were huge and had thousands of installed schools and districts all across the country. I had less than 5, and they weren't even districts, and I was selling to a district. So this multi-day process started, and I watched closely as my competitors presented their software to the school district, but I watched more closely how the school district responded. And I went home that night, and I did what I did best, and I stayed up all night, and I coded, and I hacked like crazy, and I modified my Power School system, that's what it's called, Power School, to be closer to what I could tell it was they wanted by watching closely the day before. And so the next morning, when it came time for me to present, I presented a piece of software that I knew was exactly what they wanted. Their jaws dropped, and I closed the transaction. In fact, I went on to close many other district-level high school or district-level sales that way. I closed over $500,000 as a one-man company before quickly becoming overwhelmed and realizing I needed help and brought a lot on. So the lesson from that is that while at the beginning I viewed the entrenched players in that space as like with a perspective of how am I ever going to compete against these guys, I'm a one-man company. Instead, I was able to use, not planning really at the time, this is me looking backwards because it makes me sound smarter than I was at the time. I just did all I could do because I was in the trenches, but it was using the benefits of being a small company to literally run circles around these entrenched players. It's amazing what you can do in software if you don't have to worry about things like quality control and release schedules. It all happens in 24 hours in those early stages. Now, fast forward a few more years into the Power School history, and the company has grown. We have hundreds of schools and districts using the software. We're a legitimate player in the space. We've raised several rounds of venture capital funding in the San Francisco Bay Area and elsewhere. And to my surprise, we've spent most of that $22 million that we had raised, which was astronomical to me considering where I was a few years earlier. But lo and behold, my finance people come and say, listen, it's time to find some more money. So we go out shopping for more investors for round 3 of the company. One of the companies that we're talking to at this time is Apple Computer, because we thought how great it would be to have a player that was strong in education to be an investor in Power School. But I'm frustrated because we have had 10 plus meetings with Apple, and it doesn't seem like they're really moving any closer to a yes or a no. We've got other companies that we're talking to, and as we're running out of money, I'm thinking, like, if this isn't going to go anywhere, we need to focus on opportunities that will. And so that was the framework that I went into this meeting with. So we sat in, and for the nth meeting, and me and a couple of other Power School executives are sitting in a room. And we're waiting for this, next meeting to happen. And in walks an army of Apple employees. Well, when I say an army, it's probably 15 people, so it's a very small army. But it seemed like an army to us. And in walks this army of Apple employees. They had pads of paper, they had laptops, and they all sat down and filled up this big conference table in this big conference room. And then in walked Apple's chief financial officer at the time, a gentleman named Fred Anderson, who was brilliant and did a lot of great things for Apple. He sat down, and he and I were sitting across from each other. And we started the meeting, and this was a big moment for Power School, obviously. And I said, well, Fred, why do we have all these extra people here in this meeting? And he said, well, Greg, we've thought about it, and we've decided we don't want this to be an investment. And he paused, and he said, we want it to be an acquisition. And then there was another pause. And then I said something that I'm not really quite sure still to this day why I said it, but I said, Fred, when you say acquisition, do you mean you acquire us or we're acquiring you? and I think I was just trying to be funny and break the tension, and everyone in the room was laughing, everyone except for Fred, that is. Fred seemed to be looking at me with an expression of, you snarky little smart aleck punk. And if that is what he was thinking, he was right. But we went on, had a great meeting, and we started from there doing real due diligence. So Apple's finance team, their legal team, the engineering team went through Power School with a fine-tooth comb to make sure that this indeed was a company that they wanted to acquire. But during this process, they let us know quite clearly, they're like, hey, all this work doesn't really mean anything because it all comes down to Steve Jobs. We prepare these companies for potential acquisition, Steve gives a potential thumbs up or thumbs down, and that's just the way it goes. He has to sit in a room and look at you in the eyes and decide he likes you and likes the whole vibe, or we won't do it. So I said, oh, okay, well, we'll wait for that meeting, and that came sooner than I thought. And so here I am, I find myself at Apple headquarters again in another conference room waiting for a meeting. And I'm sitting there with a few other high-level Apple executives in the room, a few of us from Power School, and the door opens and in walks Steve Jobs. The first time I've ever seen him in person. And you've got to remember that for me, it wasn't just meeting somebody famous and, I'm going to shake a hand and take a picture. This was my childhood hero. Apple Computers started in an area not that far from where I grew up. And I had read about him, I followed him, he was a business icon, and I wanted to be him. He was that kind of hero for me. I was meeting my childhood hero, and I could feel my heart beating like crazy. I had been in hundreds of these meetings, nothing really fazed me, but this meeting was fazing me. And so Steve walks in, sits down at the end, I can still picture it clearly right now, it's a conference room. He walks in, looks around, greets, sits down like this, and I'm sitting right next to him here, and he turns to me, and he says, okay, Greg, tell me about yourself. This is his first sentence to me, first time meeting Steve Jobs. And I say, oh, okay, well, I grew up here in the area, and I went to the high school right down the road, Fremont High School. And he stops me enthusiastically and says, oh, well, I went to the next high school over, Homestead High. And I said, oh, really? And I said, oh, really, as though I didn't already know that and everything about Steve Jobs ever. And so I sat there and I paused and I thought, I have just misled my childhood hero with the second sentence out of my mouth after meeting him into believing something that isn't really true. And it was quiet for a few seconds, and as I scrambled to try to how I was going to fix this, I opened my mouth knowing that something likely awkward and embarrassing would come out and that might mess up this whole thing. And I said, actually, Steve, I knew that already. And it was quiet again for a second while he looked at me, and he kind of craned his head forward and looked at me like just trying to figure out like what I was doing and what kind of guy I was. Throws his head back, starts laughing, looks around warmly at the other executives and all of us. The tension drained from the room, and everyone knew the deal was going to go after that. And it went well. Luckily, I was able to just kind of let myself come through, and that served me well in this and a number of other situations. But I thought I might be sending that deal over the edge. So now, let's fast forward. Prior to this point, I was the CEO of Power School. But after the acquisition, I was now a vice president at Apple over the Power School division. And as such, I had a standing weekly appointment with Steve Jobs to report into him about how things were going, to brainstorm about new ideas and that kind of thing. And after a while, we started to have problems with one of our major product lines. And it became clear to me that we were going to miss a significant deadline. And it fell upon me as the executive in charge to deliver this bad news to Steve Jobs. And I remember driving to Apple headquarters and calling my wife on the phone and saying, "Hun, thank you for all your help and support with Power School over the years, but I think our whole run might end right now in an hour, and I'm going to lose my job." Because we'd all heard the legends about Steve Jobs' temper and how he could end a career, he could end a whole product line, he could end a division with a single instant judgment or temper flare. And I was walking in to tell that guy some bad news. So we walk in, Steve sits down for our weekly meeting, and I just come out with him and tell him what's going to happen, or what's happening. And he looks at me and he says, "Okay, Greg, those things happen, and it is my experience that young, ambitious companies think they can conquer the world. They invariably bite off more than they can chew, and it's clear to me that's what you guys have done here. This is not the end of the world. We'll get through this." It was the most supportive, inspirational comment that, okay, I know you say 1 minute left. I've probably got a couple more left, but I'll try to wind up. And until the music starts playing, I'm just going to keep talking. No, I'm just kidding. I'll try to wind it up quickly here. I've only got one more thing to say after this. So, but it was the most inspirational thing for me. It was transformational for my own management style, how I would treat business partners and employees after that. But, after that, it was something that you might more have expected from Steve. And he said, now, I think he thought he was being too nice to me maybe in that moment. But he said, now, don't get me wrong, you guys did screw up. And I'm using the family-friendly version of that sentence here. He used more colorful language. He said, you guys did screw up, and I expect you to fix it. And that was a reasonable expectation. And but the overall tenor of the meeting and his follow-up meetings and emails were so supportive with creative. It was, when I was expecting such a negative event, to have it be positive and supportive was so encouraging and motivating and empowering to me. It doubled down on my commitment to make things work with Power School and Apple. I want to tell you one more quick story that is a different kind of story, but that is also part of my journey. 7 years ago, I was diagnosed with advanced kidney cancer. I didn't catch it early. It was stage 4, for those of you who are familiar, have been around a cancer. It had spread throughout my whole body, and the statistics, my prognosis was grim. The statistics were that 92% of those who had my condition were not even around 5 years later, and those that were in dismal shape. So my outlook was not good. It sent me into a depression. It was dark. I had myself in a very bad place, thinking things like, why me? Perhaps there are those here who have been in or around a situation like this. It's a really, really bad place. Say, why me? Why does this happen to me? There were still so many good things yet to happen in my life. And here I was being offered a death sentence. And partway through, something changed. And I started thinking that, well, yeah, why me? But I guess why not me? Because as I was saying, why me? Honestly, mentally, this one time I was thinking, well, why would I? If it's not me, is it someone else? Who would I know? A friend, a stranger? Is there anyone I would wish this on than me? No, there's not. There's no one else I would wish this on. And why not me? I have the flexibility to quit my job and to go seek medical treatment wherever I want. I'm not going to be fired for taking too long at a cancer treatment center. Why not me? There's no one better to get this and give through this than me. And I've still got time with my friends and family. And so my perspective changed just by choosing how I was going to react to this death sentence, to instead of feeling sorry for me and making what I thought was just a couple of years left in my life, to appreciating every moment, every day, and every hour. Honestly, I know that sounds cliche, but it's exactly what happened in a way that I hadn't before. And I'm standing here before you now, 7 years after that, totally cancer-free, and enjoying this moment. Thank you. I am here due to the grace of God, due to good doctors and good science, and I consider myself so fortunate. There are many who didn't have that fortune. I happened to be in a small group whose genetic makeup or something caused me to respond to a treatment I was getting in a way that most people didn't. And it was months after my initial diagnosis that I received word that my tumors were shrinking. And, I proceeded to get better after that. But something that experience has given me was this gift of relishing each moment. Every moment that I am standing and breathing and smiling, talking with a friend, with one of my kids, it feels rich. It's like the room is full of color. Just standing here right now with you guys, I feel like you're all friends, and this is a fantastic, rich experience for me. I feel that every day. That was a gift that experience yielded to me, and I pass this on to you for a couple of reasons. One, I hope that just a little bit of that if you haven't, that you don't have to necessarily go through that experience that I did to bring what seems like kind of a cliche statement to make the most of every day and appreciate it. It does sound a cliche, and that's exactly how I took it before I went through this experience, but it is a real change, and I felt like I now could choose how I was going to respond, and it made me appreciate everything. That has stuck with me. You can apply that to business challenges. You can apply it to life challenges of any kind. But my experience in all, I guess my message is that if a regular kid with just a high school assignment can start something that follows the path of the dream he's had and allows him to start from that one class project and to build a company that today manages the records over 100 million students and is the largest system in the world of its type, which I'm no longer involved with, by the way, then really anybody can do anything. So thank you for your time.